the goal and the means are here to be understood as equal. So the path and the destination, but you cannot tell which one is more important. And at some point, it's not that we lose the sight of the goal, but the path becomes too meandering. Or is it okay, I will remain my whole life on the path and the goal doesn't matter? These are all pendulum of minds wandering, whereas once it's seized fully for what it is, then it is recognized there and then both the path and the goal are one and the same, and it cannot be otherwise. Okay.
Okay, so my question pertains to the discussion we've been having about creativity. So my life now is flowing into a more creative direction, and I'm very conscious that I want that to be of service, the creativity. So I want to make sure that whatever I create is of the highest service. And I wonder, is it just a question of going deep enough and then manifesting from the deeper level, or is there some conscious intentionality around the creative process? So I'd really appreciate your thoughts on that.
I also appreciate the intentionality behind that. So like this is already reciprocated, that appreciation of the intention that goes into the question, into your inquiry. So this gives us an opportunity to look at it so as not to get locked into that loop. I mean, that loop could be called non-duality loop, or it doesn't have to be called. There is also a loop, because the question of will is addressed here, question of free will, question of whether we are at all in any way in charge when it comes to, let's say, creative processes, when it comes to not just creative processes, in the case of your inquiry, how to align with, let's say, what and how best to use this creativity in service and evolutionary direction and so forth, right?
Exactly.
So this in itself is could become a slippery slope. After all, right? The proverbial, roads to hell are paved with good intentions. We know that. There is also this a post factum realization. Perhaps I borrowed that again. I've done it many times. And like quote John Lennon: "Life is what happens to us whilst we're busy making other plans." So in other words, a post factum realization of what otherwise doesn't meet our approval in a given moment in time, only upon reevaluation gains greater insight, great appreciation. So this is like, is it a dawn of wisdom, or simply because we now are being presented with the way too obvious a picture to ignore it? So all this is part and parcel of what you're asking, see? So, but how can that be addressed from a practical level? What is there going on, perhaps, at the subtle state of affairs? So first, I feel like maybe slightly tweaking the way you put it, right? Just how did you begin, right? As you're getting what?
So my life is going in a more creative direction.
My life is going in a more creative direction,
yes.
Right? So my life is going in a more creative direction. It's a way of language. There's nothing wrong with that. But I somehow feel if we place it at a slightly different angle, it opens up the possibility of seeing it perhaps in a slightly different light. So instead of life is going in a more creative direction, right? Is that something within your own consciousness opens up where the creativity simply becomes that directional flow. So not the life goes in towards somewhere. It's not that the life is somehow unfolds. And I am fully aware that we are picking now, right, kind of on how it can be expressed. But very often, when we think of the way the language is structured, the way we express ourselves. So let's say you put it into your journal, and then you read it back to yourself, and then you ponder, and you feel, actually I can put it in a, perhaps, if not more accurate, but in a truer sense. So life doesn't really flow in any direction, but there is something that is inseparable from that flow. Because I am life myself. I'm an expression of life, because life and consciousness are one. And creativity here is the natural state that becoming more and more natural, more and more my second nature. So at some point, and I just love sharing this, simply love sharing this, it's recognized as one's state, and everything is charged with that. Absolutely everything. So from, let's say, painting a grandiose mural to doing something in the corner, a small little sketch, if we are to give that to borrowed example, visual artists, like traditional visual artists, right? It's the same thing. Absolutely the same thing. It's the creativity. Yes, in the case of mural, where it will be exposed, many people will see it, it will impact. Maybe it's public place, maybe it's an exterior, maybe it's interior. Whatever the case is, it's not my little doodle here, it's not my little private little sketchbook. It's something that also adheres to some form of at least temporal permanence. So the materials that, it's like you can't just like first thing come out of your hand, consider this is worthy of being turned into a precious material. Let's say mosaic, fresco, maybe stained glass, maybe something which it will be then given the precious form. Maybe it's a conceptual work of art, maybe it's a sculpture. So, but the state of excitement, state of excitation, it's the same when you are just arrested by seeing a cup on your table or a peach from the market, and you want to depict that, or whatever. Translate this into any other sphere of your interests, it's the same thing. So the state is what counts here. And that state is a natural state. In a way, it's both here, paradoxically. It can be seen at once as a byproduct of expansion of consciousness. That byproduct becoming more creative, full stop. But the unfoldment of consciousness, when the stuff that prior to that had clogged the system, opens up these channels, and it just flows. Just like anything that flows has the channels to flow. When these channels are obstructed, it gets to be collected somewhere. It goes into the crevices. It finds its ways, or it gets stagnant somewhere until it reaches the point, maybe critical mass, what have you. And it can also be seen as the very goal of the unfoldment of consciousness itself. This is why I speak of it as paradoxical at once, a byproduct and a goal. Which one that is? it becomes irrelevant once we enjoy that state. It becomes irrelevant. The greatest, perhaps, bias, if we can call that, in terms of what to anticipate from enlightenment, self-realization, self-recognition, and all that, what goes under that category of self in terms of reclaiming it, is that somehow that brings a kind of end of all, and kind of, like the mythological kind of like, this is it, I've made it. Yeah, like I've made it. This is it now. So, like all my problems, all my worries, troubles are now laid asunder. The bias here is primarily in, again, perhaps of lack of shared consensus of what really that is. Somehow it maybe got morphed into a mythology of its own kind. Like whenever I utter these words, and whenever I do that myself, I immediately internally feel, gosh, this has been said a gazillion of times already. As soon as we mention the word Buddha, we run into the danger of missing really the actuality of what's happening. So that goal and means, now I'm taking you back to this understanding that Tantra works with. The goal and the means are here to be understood as equal. So the path and the destination, but you cannot tell which one is more important. And at some point, it's not that we lose the sight of the goal, but the path becomes too meandering. Or is it okay, I will remain my whole life on the path and the goal doesn't matter? These are all pendulum of minds wandering, whereas once it's seized fully for what it is, then it is recognized there and then both the path and the goal are one and the same, and it cannot be otherwise. And it's not that the eagerness maybe is deflated somehow, but something else is taking place, and that's what creativity is. So creativity here is indeed a byproduct and the goal. But as a chicken and egg story, we cannot say which one is more important. So that's with regard to this, let's say, sharp angle of what this is and how it can be put. And with regard to, is it possible to direct, let's say, right? How to be of service? Is it possible to navigate here? In other words, where is the territory opened to free will, right? Where is it? Where is the will or thy will ends and my mind begins? Where is it that we are simply tossed in the, in the sea of consciousness, and we may think that we are like, utilizing something, like a boat swimming, or this, like we're trying to take the direction really, but the waves just carry us. What perhaps would be helpful here to simply keep in view is that always with the unfoldment, with the expansion of consciousness, and there are distinctive, let's say, what we could call symptomatology or the signs that, right, that's signposted, that highlights, that gives us this sense that there is indeed, like in more of a theological, let's say, way of speaking about it, when the prayers are answered. In other words, when something taking place where that sign is given, where that nod is given, where that, that's what it is. And it's very, very internal. It requires a lot of honesty to separate wheat from the chaff in terms of whether we're coming from mental agitation, mental wishful thinking, mental paving the roads, and pure or sheer genius of intuition. This is a lot could be said. It's a theme in its own right, because they belong to really different categories in consciousness in terms of what they represent. Mental activity is one thing, and intuition belongs to intellect. It's a more refined faculty. Mental activity belongs to that where there is a steadfast connection to the principle of individuality. In other words, there's no mental activity without ahamkara. Whereas intuition is the property of buddhi, intellect. And buddhi, even if we are to go by some of the fundamentals of Indian philosophy, is free from the restraints or constraints of ahamkara. Therefore, buddhi is spoken often as the first primal manifestation of cosmic principle, universal principle, that intuition belongs to a sphere of divine, there and then. So therefore, flash of intuition can light up years of trying to solve something at a mental level. A flash of intuition. So this is with regard to which way and how we go. So being fully aware that if we ask sincerely to be instruments and delegate that, then we shall receive. We shall receive that guidance. We shall receive confirmation. We shall receive that needed signs, that needed nod, that needed confirmation. Reverse is also true. There may be something which will warn us to remain vigilant and not just sort of run on this happy-go-lucky that, as long as I'm thinking now that I'm in the hands of the divine and I'm the instrument of the divine, when in fact it's just a catch-22, you are just in the hamkaric field trying to ascertain your own sort of like, constantly trying to ascertain something on a gross level, but now it feels on a subtle level. Before it was in life situations trying to prove something, prove one's point of view, one's preferred point of view, one's dearly held ideology. And then now in the spiritual realm, it just gains a more subtle dimension, but it's of the same stuff. So, yeah.